big question tonight as we come on the air. How close are we potentially from federal charges for former President Donald Trump? His lawyers in D.C. tonight talking with the special counsel as our team is learning more about the timing of the federal grand jury looking at that classified documents case. We'll tell you how Mr. Trump's defending himself tonight and what our team is just confirming. Also tonight, the stunning new details on that sonic boom right here in Washington with the fighter pilots who scrambled saw in the cockpit of the plane that ended up crashing. Plus, a wild warning from the CDC. A bunch of deadly meningitis cases linked to Americans crossing the Mexican border for cosmetic surgeries. So what's the risk this spreads even more? Then Apple rolling out its new VR headset that it says is revolutionary but familiar. Are people really in the market anymore to alter their reality? And as we speak, the Kansas City Chiefs celebrating their Super Bowl win at the White House with one of America's biggest Eagles fans. How awkward. How upsetting. How are we not going to talk about it? That's later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and this week we may be getting closer to answering a big question about former President Donald Trump. Might he face federal charges for mishandling those classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago? Because look at this right here. 3 of his lawyers walking out of meetings today with top officials at the Justice Department after our team's exclusive reporting that a federal grand jury, hearing all the evidence in this case, will get together again sometime this week. Remember, this is all part of that investigation by special counsel Jack Smith. And by the way, in the last couple of minutes, we found out he was in that meeting with Donald Trump's attorneys, according to somebody familiar with the matter. Smith is looking at a couple of key questions here. First, did Donald Trump take hundreds of classified documents that he knew he shouldn't have taken back to Mar-a-Lago? And second, did he get in the government's way when they tried to get those documents back? Let's lay out what we know here, right? Let's start with the facts. Last June, we know federal agents went to Mr. Trump's Florida home to get a couple dozen documents back. The Trump legal team signed a letter saying basically, okay, that's all we have. That turned out not to be true because the FBI then found more than 100 classified documents during a surprise search in August. We also know from our reporting here at NBC News that the grand jury has heard a tape from 2021 that seems to show Mr. Trump acknowledging that he had taken some classified documents. This particular case is just one of the legal issues facing Mr. Trump, who, remember, is the current 2024 Republican frontrunner in the race for the White House. But this could be the first time ever that a former president has faced federal charges. In the last couple of hours, we've heard from Donald Trump. He's echoing what he said before, that this is a witch hunt, and he's asking how the DOJ can charge him when he says he did nothing wrong. Laura Jarrett is joining us now to break this down. And let me start with our newest reporting here at NBC. Laura, what does it mean that Jack Smith was in this meeting at the DOJ? Is this a blinking yellow light that the end could be near on this case?
I think it at least means that this is dead serious. Obviously, having the special counsel himself there means that this is not some frivolous matter. And of course, it's totally regular to have defense attorneys make their last pitch to say, you should not charge my client. I've been in those meetings before on the defense side, pleading with the government not to do it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's what you pay good defense attorneys for. In this case, obviously, they've put out a number of different arguments for why the president has committed no crimes. The president maintains he has done nothing wrong. Remains to be seen whether, in fact, the Justice Department agrees with them. And we should mention, this is not fully baked yet, right? We are not reporting about any charges. We are not reporting that there's an indictment. All we're saying at this moment is that after having gone dark for literally a month, the grand jury is now meeting once again, and it does appear that we are in the final stages of this investigation.
It is a key caveat, Laura, right? The idea, we don't know what's going to happen this week. We are simply reading the tea leaves. You are leading the charge on that based on the reporting that we have. If there were to be crimes to be charged, and again, we don't know that that's the case, but if that, in fact, is where this is going, what does that look like?
There are 2 different buckets to think about. The first bucket is the retaining of classified information when he did not have the authority to do so. We're talking about when he is no longer president, keeping the materials in places they should not be, like in a storage room, right? The mishandling of government documents, you can see there. There's a separate bucket, Hallie, to think about how he would be, in this case, alleged to have obstructed the investigation and trying to prevent federal government officials from getting the documents back. Remember, they asked him nicely many times, please give us our documents back, and he doesn't. They had to get a subpoena. Then they had to get a search warrant. We remember the Mar-a-Lago raid back in August of last year. That happens because he didn't give the documents back. And so they're also looking at, as we understand it, based on the search warrant, prosecutors are looking at potential obstruction issues as well. So they're two separate issues.
Laura, Jarrett, lots of moving pieces here tonight. Thank you for being on top of it for us.
Anytime.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Tonight, we are getting some brand new, frankly, stunning details about the nervous scramble or the scramble period of some of these military fighter jets going supersonic to try to intercept a small plane as it drifted off course right here in Washington in restricted airspace before the plane crashed, killing 4 people in just the last 24 hours. Those fighter jets creating those sonic booms so loud they literally shook buildings. People could hear and feel it all across D.C. They were trying to catch up with that plane, partly because of the potential for a security threat. They didn't know, right? People were posting this stuff all over social media. Listen. So the dog hopping up there as that boom came up. We're learning the pilot of that plane was incapacitated, apparently slumped over in the cockpit, and was not responding to radio calls. It had flown right over the Capitol before crashing in rural Virginia. Federal investigators are now on the scene. They're trying to figure out what went wrong. Tom Costello joins us now, and it has been, Tom, a 24-hour, it seems, in some ways, scramble to try to get some answers here. Tell us more about what we know right now.
Just moments ago, I got done talking to the director of aviation safety for the NTSB, describing the conditions on the ground there in Virginia, where they have now put an NTSB team. It took them 4 hours to hike in. It's extremely rugged, extremely remote territory that this plane went down in. And we now know that all 4 people on board that plane unfortunately passed away. The timeline is as follows. When you look at what happened and what we know happened, that the pilot was literally out of communication for the better part of 2 hours. The plane left at about 1:13 in the afternoon. And then the pilot, just a few minutes later, air traffic control was trying to raise him. He did not respond at 1:28. 1:28, 15 minutes later. So then they continued to try to raise him. No response. It went all the way, the plane went all the way up to Long Island, then did a U-turn and came back. And that's when they scrambled the fighter jets, because it was coming close to Washington, D.C. restricted airspace. And then the pilots in the fighter jets realized the pilot was incapacitated, and they tracked him all the way into Virginia, where it crashed. Interestingly, though, as it relates to the decision to scramble the fighter jets, John Kirby at the White House talked about that just a short time ago.
They had to turn on the speed to get to him, which is why people here in the district area heard a sonic boom. They had to break the sound barrier to get up the speed to get to the aircraft in question.
Interestingly here, I did want to make the point that interestingly here, this plane seemed to have done an auto U-turn. In other words, it was on autopilot, came back, and then was going right back to the origin airport. And the reason for that could be, if everybody on board was incapacitated, that the autopilot had been pre-programmed. So the first stop was going to be Long Island, then back to Tennessee. When the plane didn't descend in Long Island, the autopilot simply took it on a big U-turn, headed back to Tennessee.
That would explain why the plane turned around, Tom. There have been so many questions on that front. Do you know anything else? I know that NBC News, I don't believe, has identified any of the people yet on board, or at least is not publicly able to.
Well, our NBC station in New York has now found the 2 of the people on board. Adina Azarian, a prominent real estate agent broker in New York, on board with her 2-year-old. The little girl's name was Aria. Also on board was the nanny and, of course, the pilot, who aviation sources have told me was a very accomplished pilot, had many years with a major airline, and was very experienced. The leading suspicion right now, it's only a suspicion, is that they suffered an in-flight decompression event in which they lost all the oxygen, breathable oxygen, inside the plane. And with that, they were incapacitated within a minute.
Oh, Tom Costello, awful story. Thank you very much for the late-breaking details for us tonight. I appreciate it. 2024 presidential race tonight is getting a little bit bigger as we speak. Former Vice President Mike Pence filing paperwork with the FEC just in the last few hours to make it officially official that, yes, as has been speculated about for over a year, he is, in fact, going to run for president. Of course, that sets him up to challenge his former boss, Donald Trump. The campaign says Mr. Pence will formally do the kickoff in Iowa Wednesday afternoon. And by the way, this week, Pence isn't the only one getting in. Look what's happening tomorrow. We expect former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie to make it official, according to multiple sources. And North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum looks like he will announce sometime in the next few days as well. I want to bring in Vaughn Hilliard. Okay, so the field is expanding. We knew that it would. There's two questions here, right? There's like the Pence question, which is this is not a big shocker from Mike Pence, right? I mean, since, as you know, over 18 months probably, we've been talking to his people. I've heard from them, well, he hasn't, we'll see when we get... This has been speculated about for a long time, but explain how he fits into the mix. What is his lane? What do they see as his lane?
Right. Hallie, if we could, I know there's a lot that has happened over the years here, but now that the paperwork has been formally filed by Mike Pence, let's just take into account that the vice president of the United States is running against the guy that he served with. America has not seen that happen since 1940, when Vice President John Nance Garner ran against Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1940, who was seeking a third term. Okay, these are weird stakes involved here, and our politics is weird today. And the role that Mike Pence is looking to play, even this weekend in Iowa, I was with him there. You see him on the stage, and he was addressing a crowd. He kept referring to the administration, our time in the administration, the administration's policies. He essentially wants to run as the Trump administration with its policies and what he calls accomplishments, but without everything else that comes along with Donald Trump. He's got 8 months to convince the electorate to give him a shot. It's 8 months till the Iowa caucus, Hallie.
Pulling back a little bit more macro, Vaughn, so it's 8 months to the caucus, fine. We know Mike Pence wants to get it. We know that Chris Christie's jumping in the race, Doug Burgum. There's already a slate of candidates, including Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis. At some point, when is too many too many? And by that, I mean, if Donald Trump does have such a grip on the Republican base, as polls repeatedly have shown that he does, at what point is there the risk that the field is simply too large to try to take Donald Trump out of that pole position?
Right. Hallie, I'm not smart enough to know what that timeline looks like, but
question.
we have two metric points, though. 8 years ago, at the very end, Ted Cruz and John Kasich, they were the last men standing against Donald Trump there, and they both said, okay, you have this state, I'll campaign in this state, and it was an effort to try to beat Donald Trump somehow, and it was too late at that point. Donald Trump was the runaway favorite. He ultimately won the nomination. The second metric point, though, is a current one, and that's put up actually by the New Hampshire governor, Chris Sununu, who just a few hours ago today said he will not enter this presidential race. And he urged other candidates who are not relevant in the conversation, do not have high polling numbers by Christmas time. That'll be about 1 month out from the Iowa caucus, to drop out of the race. So that is a Republican who considered running for president, who said that candidates that are not polling well by Christmas time need to drop out so that somebody who is not Donald Trump has a chance to beat the current frontrunner.
Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex.
Not too long ago, the Biden administration is warning China is getting more and more aggressive after the U.S. military released this video showing a pretty close encounter between this Chinese ship and a U.S. destroyer in the Taiwan Strait over the weekend. So look at this, right? This is how close the two got, which is why you're hearing the NSC spokesperson, White House official John Kirby, saying it could really only be a matter of time until things get legitimately dangerous. Listen.
It won't be long before somebody gets hurt. That's the concern with these unsafe and unprofessional intercepts. They can lead to misunderstandings. They can lead to miscalculations.
China's defending what it did, with the foreign ministry saying at a briefing that it was lawful, that the U.S. should reflect on the mistakes that they made. It's the latest in a series of these close calls with China, with tensions building and building between the two countries. Look at this from last week, right? The Defense Department releasing this video. That's a Chinese fighter jet, they say, flying right in front of the nose of a U.S. plane over the South China Sea. There it is again. Issue number 2, right? Courtney Kube, our Pentagon correspondent, is joining us now. Obviously, we don't even have to say that the U.S. Defense Department sees this encounter with the ships very differently than China does. They see it as bullying.
Right. So, I mean, basically here, Hallie, each side is saying the other is provoking with their actions. So on the part of the U.S., they're saying that the Chinese are acting in an aggressive, a dangerous, a provocative way with these close calls between U.S. military and Chinese ships and aircraft that we've seen just in the past few days. On the other hand, the Chinese government is saying that, in fact, the U.S. operating, exercising, and maneuvering in these areas is the provocative action, and that they are simply responding to it. And what this comes comes down to at the end of the day is that the Chinese maintain that many of these areas that the U.S. and most of the world recognize as international airspace, international waterways, the Chinese say, well, no, we have a claim to some of these places, specifically the South China Sea and the East China Sea. Now, that's where we saw that encounter between the U.S. and the Chinese aircraft only a few days ago. But what we saw over the weekend was actually in the Taiwan Strait. Now, in this case, the U.S. Navy destroyer was exercising with a Canadian military vessel when this Chinese ship came about 150 yards from the U.S. Navy ship. Now, some of our viewers may say, that's like 1.5 football fields. That's not that big a deal. But that's really close when you're talking about these large ships that don't turn very easily. They don't stop very easily. And the critical piece is here, it sailed straight in front of the U.S. destroyer. That's what John Kirby's talking about when he says someone has the potential to get hurt here. The chance of a collision in these kinds of cases is significant, Hallie.
I get a football field and a half, right, Courtney? But we're talking about the ocean. Like, there's plenty of space where they could be. And that's why this is such a concern. What signal, what message is China trying to send with that move? And what happens if there is a third incident now in the short period of time?
And it's not just that. These have been very deliberate incidents. Right. So when we see cases of something like the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, when they have sort of these close encounters with U.S. Navy ships in the Strait of Hormuz or those areas, oftentimes that is not necessarily at the direction of the larger Iranian Navy or even the Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Chinese military operates differently. These cases are almost exclusively directed from higher up. There's a deliberate nature of them. So as far as if there will be a third incident, I think that is very plausible. The reality is these two militaries, they operate near one another pretty commonly, right? So generally, though, these sorts of intercepts, whether they're in the air or at sea, generally, they're safe and they are professional. So they will sail along or fly along next to one another without any kind of an incident. The question is, if there's another more aggressive move, like we've seen more recently, how can the U.S. and China resolve it? Because at this point, they're not talking to one another, at least not on a military level, Hallie.
Courtney Kuby, thanks for being all over that for us tonight. Appreciate it. So we have Russia claiming tonight that Ukraine has launched basically a big attack here. Ukraine says that's a lie, and that the big counteroffensive they've been planning to try to take back some land has not actually started yet. The statement out of Moscow today says up to 300 Ukrainian troops have been killed, and that, I'm quoting here, that the enemy was unsuccessful in achieving its goals. A spokesperson for Ukraine says this claim is just not true. They're not going to say when any attacks will happen or what they'll target. The U.S. today says it's done its best to have Ukraine ready for whatever lies ahead in this pivotal point.
What I can speak to is how hard we worked to prepare them to be ready. The president's confident that we did everything we could over the last 6-8 months or more to make sure that they had all the equipment, the training, the capabilities to be successful.
Molly Hunter has more from Kyiv.
This has been a day of chasing that Russian Ministry of Defense statement, which kicked this all off overnight, claims that Russia had repelled a, quote, large-scale offensive. They say offensive, not a counter-offensive, which is the language that Ukrainian officials and Western allies use when they talk about the stated goal of that counteroffensive on the Ukrainian side. It's to take back land that Russia is currently occupying inside Ukraine. But this Russian Ministry of Defense statement called it an offensive. They said it was happening in the southern part of the eastern Donetsk region. They said it was unsuccessful. And that same statement said hundreds of Ukrainian troops died. Now, NBC News has not verified that claim. We've also not independently verified the drone video that they released that Russia says shows Ukrainian troops trying to break through that Russian defensive line. Well, just in the last couple of hours, we've received two statements, one from the Eastern Group of Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, who told NBC News that this is an absolute lie, referring to that statement. They did not cause us any losses. They understand that we have combat work going on, which will soon be reflected in their position. And then the deputy defense minister put out a statement, and she said, what is happening now? We are continuing the defense that we started on February 24th, 2022. A defensive operation includes everything, including counter-offensive action. So they are saying, of course, they will be pushing that Russian defensive line. Of course, they will be looking for vulnerabilities in that defensive line, specifically around the Donbass region. Now, Ukrainian officials have long said they will not confirm or even announce a start of a counteroffensive. Over the weekend, though, President Zelensky, sitting down with the Wall Street Journal, really kicked that speculation into high gear for those of us reading the tea leaves. He said, we are ready very clearly to launch a counteroffensive. The next day, though, the Ukrainian military released a 30-second video where basically Ukrainian soldiers are seen going shh like this in the campaign of silence. I think what we'll be telling, though, is how hard Russia hits Ukrainian cities if they continue their stepped-up aerial bombardments tonight. I'll send it back to you.
Our thanks to Molly Hunter for that reporting. Twitter's new CEO is starting today, set to at least, with the company facing a whole bunch of issues, including reports that their ad sales are down. That is a problem potentially for Twitter's bottom line. The New York Times saying it's down something like 59% from a year earlier, citing an internal presentation, and that the company has regularly missed their weekly sales goals by as much as 30% sometimes. NBC News has not independently seen that presentation, but it comes as there has been a rise in hate speech and porn on Twitter. Issues set to be inherited by Linda Yaccarino, the former head of advertising at NBC Universal, which is, of course, the parent company of NBC News. Musk brought her on to oversee business operations at Twitter. Dave Ingram is joining us now. So here it is, Linda Yaccarino taking the reins today, coming in, and the question being, can she right this ship, given what we know about what's happening with Twitter potentially bleeding money that it doesn't want to be bleeding?
Yeah, Hallie, in some ways, Linda's experience is the opposite of Elon Musk's. Before he bought Twitter, Elon Musk was best known for leading Tesla, the electric automaker, and for his work leading SpaceX, the rocket maker. Linda, by contrast, has spent 30-some years in the advertising business, an area where Elon Musk had never worked previously. So she sort of has this complementary experience to his background. And she is a face that everyone in advertising sort of knows. It's a still kind of a tight-knit industry. A lot of people based in New York, and Linda has spent years and years walking in the hallways and meeting advertisers, people that Twitter needs to survive as a business. Something like 90% of the revenue of Twitter, going back years, has come from advertisers. And while Musk has tried to diversify the revenue with subscriptions, the vast majority still would come from advertising if he's hoping to pay down his debt. So she's got a pretty critical role, and you know, you might say there's nowhere to go from here but up from Twitter's advertising standpoint, according to these numbers in the New York Times.
Let's look at something else that is something that Twitter has been dealing with more, or at least in an intense way under Elon Musk, and that is the rise in hate speech, the rise in pornographic images as conveyed by researchers at Stanford, reported by the Wall Street Journal today, saying that Twitter has missed dozens of known images of child sex abuse from getting posted on its platform. They say that in a couple of months, from March to May, their system detected more than 40 of these kinds of things, based out of a data set of 100,000 some tweets. This is something, this goes beyond the issue of ad sales or misinformation or whatever. What is Twitter's plan to stop things like this from getting posted?
Yeah, this is a really disturbing report, not only because of the kind of content that we're talking about, but this particular content was content that had been flagged as problematic, potentially illegal, on other platforms, platforms like Facebook or elsewhere. And these companies all share information about what they've taken down so that other companies can prevent the same images from being reposted. What the researchers found here was that Twitter had failed to take down images that were known to be problematic. So this is sort of the low-hanging fruit that Twitter had failed to catch. So in theory, they can improve their performance here very quickly and very easily. To bring it back to the new CEO here, you know, one of her challenges is going to be that she's not really in charge of all of Twitter. Musk is still in charge of the technology, so they have to work together on problems like this.
Dave Ingram, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Let's take over to Wall Street now, where we're getting a glimpse today. It may be some more confusing news for the stock market. It seems good because for a very brief moment today, the S&P 500 touched a new 9-month high. I want to show you. So you see they ended down in the red, right? Down. However, there's a magic number that the S&P is like 20 points away from hitting that would be a huge deal. I want to show you why. It's the potential for a new bull market. In plain English, that's when stocks, experts generally agree, when stocks go 20% over whatever their recent low was. It means that investors feel good. They feel optimistic. They're pumping money into the stock market. The strength on Wall Street now is maybe throwing some folks off big time because there's been a whole bunch of them who have predicted a recession. Caleb Silver is joining us now. S&P hitting a bull market is a good thing for investors. But how are we supposed to square that with all of these like scary recession vibes that we've also been getting from economists and experts in this space? Help us understand how to think about this.
Yeah, well, you have to separate the economy and the stock market.
I was just going to say, if you tell me the markets are not the economy and that's the answer, I feel like I would predict that from you.
True, but they do walk in hand sometimes. But right now, investors are looking way into the futures. And the one thing investors hate is uncertainty. It's like kryptonite. They don't know what to do. But we have certainty about a number of issues. The debt ceiling issue, that's not an issue anymore. The Federal Reserve is going to meet on interest rates next week. They're likely going to pause or not raise them much more this year. We know that now, so we can bank around that. We've seen corporate earnings in the last corporate earnings report season. Those were better than expected. So knowing that, investors are usually way ahead of the economy, and they're always betting on the future. The future looks a lot better out 5, 6 months, even into next year, even though there's a lot of concerns about a recession. There's a lot of concerns about everything. But while we've been concerned about all these things, the S&P 500 has risen 11% this year. The NASDAQ, which is mostly those tech and healthcare stocks, that's up 26%. So while there's walls of worry everywhere, the stock market's been quietly grinding its way higher, which is good for everyone who's invested. And that's about half the country, Hallie. Caleb
Silver, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, a woman seen as a serial killer in Australia over the deaths of her children, now pardoned and free. We'll tell you why. Plus, the main suspect in Natalie Holloway's disappearance set to be extradited to the U.S. soon. We'll tell you when in our 5 things. An update on that deadly building collapse in Iowa, including a new lawsuit now against the property owner and some contractors. We'll talk about that in our 5 things. But first, tonight, an Australian woman is free after spending 20 years in prison over the deaths of her 4 children. Kathleen Folbig getting an unconditional pardon after a state attorney general recommended it because of new evidence that suggested actually perhaps her kids were not murdered after all, that they died of natural causes. Folbig had been convicted of manslaughter or murder in their deaths, which happened separately over the span of about a decade. Josh Letterman is joining us now. This is sort of explosive and extraordinary news in Australia that is making waves around the world here. There was apparently reasonable doubt that led to her being freed. Explain that.
Yeah, well, this case is so bizarre, Hallie, because this was not one incident in which all of these kids died. The first kid, Caleb, died at just 19 days old back in 1989. And then the 3 others died in separate incidents over the course of a whole decade at ages 8 months, 10 months, as well as 19 months old. And prosecutors had said, look, these deaths are so similar to each other that it's impossible that this was simply a coincidence. They concluded that she had smothered them, strangled them, essentially. But there was never any direct physical evidence. And in fact, they had also relied on these diary entries in which Folbig had expressed regret and guilt over the fact that her kids had died. But she never explicitly said she had killed them. And now this new review by a former judge found that it's possible all of them were natural causes because in part of a genetic mutation in what's called the CARE2 gene that he believes could have led to the deaths of 3 of them by causing cardiac arrhythmias, essentially irregular heartbeats. 2 of the kids later found to have that genetic mutation. And the 4th child who died, this review found that he might have had underlying neurological conditions that led to his death. And so ultimately, that was enough reasonable doubt for this attorney general to say it is time for an unconditional pardon.
When will that happen, right? Because Folbig always claimed that her kids died from natural causes. When might her conviction actually be overturned? She has this pardon, but her conviction is still technically on the record, right?
That's exactly right. It is completely on her record for now. It could take up to a year for the full final review that the Court of Appeals will need to make that decision. But in the meantime, the Attorney General of New South Wales has already made clear how he feels about it. Michael Daly saying in a statement, we've got 4 little Bubbas who are dead, a husband and a wife who lost each other, a woman who spent 20 years in jail, and a family that never had a chance. So you'd not be human if you didn't feel something about that. But in the meantime, Folbig is a free woman for now. She walked out of prison today a full 10 years before her prison sentence was originally set to end, Hallie.
Josh Letterman, thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a woman who lived in that now collapsed Iowa apartment building is suing the building's owner and the city. The suit claims that they knew the building was dangerous but didn't tell tenants. It comes the same day that a 3rd body has been pulled from the debris of that building. It means that everybody who was inside during the collapse is now accounted for, and those bodies of those who were killed have been found. Number 2, the mother of one of the 4 Idaho college students killed in November says she will not attend the suspect's trial. Ethan Chapin's mom telling the Today Show, our own Savannah Guthrie, that the family is focused on healing one another and keeping Ethan's memory alive. The accused killer, Brian Koberger, has pleaded not guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder. That trial is set to begin in October. Number 3, Jorn Vandersloot, the main suspect in the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, is set to be extradited to the U.S. this week. He's facing fraud and extortion charges. Vandersloot was one of the last people to be seen with Holloway in 2005 when she disappeared in Aruba, a case that made headlines around the world. He's been serving a 28-year prison sentence in Peru for the murder of a different woman. Number 4, Spotify is laying off 200 employees specifically from its podcasting unit. That's about 2% of its whole workforce. The senior executive says they'll take a different approach to podcasts. They're going to rely more on partnerships with people who already do them rather than trying to create their own. Number 5, taking Pretty in Pink to an entirely new level. Production on the Barbie movie may have caused a worldwide shortage of pink paint. According to the LA Times, paint companies are already kind of running low because of supply chain issues. So to get this like Barbie look, the film had to totally clean out Hollywood's main paint supplier of all of its bubblegum pink paint. So if you want to repaint your child's room, just know, you might have to wait a minute. To other news now, where 3 Americans dead from a fungal meningitis outbreak that's being linked to cosmetic surgeries in Mexico. The CDC now warning hundreds of other people could be at risk. This is just one of multiple concerns that face people who are heading across the border to get cosmetic surgery. Why are they doing it? Well, because it's cheaper. This multi-state outbreak of this fungal meningitis has been traced to people who were treated at clinics in Matamoros. You see the map here. It's just over the border, down from San Antonio, just over the border of Texas. So far, the CDC says more than 200 people in 25 states have been potentially exposed because they got an epidural at those clinics this year. Mexico is the 2nd most popular destination for so-called medical tourism, according to Patients Beyond Borders. More than 1 million Americans travel there every year to take advantage of these cheaper treatments, everything from dental work to light cosmetic surgeries. The CDC says anybody who had an epidural, right, so that's anesthesia that's given to you through your back, at either of these clinics this year should be tested for meningitis ASAP, even if they don't have symptoms. Dr. Natalie Azar is joining us now. This is a very specific type of meningitis. Explain what we're seeing here and the big concern.
Yeah, so meningitis is basically an umbrella term, Hallie, that refers to inflammation of the lining of the brain and the spinal cord. In the U.S. and really around the world, viral meningitis is the most common. It can accompany viruses that cause the common cold, which I know is a little bit nerve-wracking, but tends to be very mild, and people, will get better without any treatment. Fungal and bacterial meningitis, on the other hand, are truly medical emergencies and need to be treated immediately in the case of a fungus with antifungal medication, and in case of bacterial meningitis with, of course, antibacterials. As kids go off to college, they get the meningococcal vaccine. That might start to sound familiar. That's to prevent, meningitis caused by meningococcal B.
Medical tourism has been a thing that we've talked about on this show. It's been growing and growing and growing for years. And Matamoros is right across the border from Texas, from a town called Brownsville, right? Explain the dynamic there. Do you hear about that from your patients? What should people be looking for if they do want to go get, granted, cheaper care, right, in other countries?
So the number one thing, Hallie, is to understand that any facility that's providing this kind of care needs to have infection prevention and control procedures in place. But how is someone going to know that, right? Unless you're having somebody on the ground who's going to vet that for you. So a couple of tips that I would have for people would be the following. Make sure that the facility or the hospital you're going to has received some sort of certification or accreditation. All hospitals in this country and medical facilities are evaluated by what we call the Joint Commission. And that is a really rigorous process to make sure that standards, prevention prevention, infection prevention control and all of that kind of stuff is up to date. You want to look and see whether or not they have any, safety issues. Look at their safety record. Has there been any litigation against them? And finally, the people who are providing the care, are they licensed? Are they up to date on board certifications? I got to tell you, I know it sounds appealing, to have a facelift or have some sort of plastic surgery for maybe a third of the price that you would pay for here in this country, but there's a risk involved, right? I mean, again, like I said, I can make a recommendation for people to do all of these things, but at the end of the day, do you really know? We have these strict, measures in place in this country that may not be the place or the same everywhere else. And it's kind of like up to the person getting the procedure to make sure that they have vetted where they're going to do it. It is a bit of a risk. And, this doesn't happen commonly. It's a rare occurrence, especially with these fungal infections with medical equipment. But when it does happen, it is incredibly serious, Hallie.
Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you very much. When we come back, Prince Harry heading to court, set to be the first British royal to testify in more than a century. We'll talk about what's at stake in this showdown with the tabloids coming up. We are hearing that inside a London courtroom today, a judge is not too happy with the fact that Prince Harry didn't show up for day one of these court proceedings in this highly anticipated case between him and a British newspaper publisher. Harry's expected to take the stand tomorrow, but the judge in the case says the first witness should have been ready to go from the start in case they had time for testimony today. Prince Harry's lawyer said he couldn't make it because he'd just flown in from L.A. He'd been celebrating his daughter's birthday. So what's the deal with this case? Harry is going up against Mirror Group newspapers. That's the publisher of the Daily Mirror, the first of multiple lawsuits that he has against some of the most well-known tabloids in the UK. And his claims against all these groups are pretty similar. The members of the press broke the law by doing things like hacking into his phone to get scoops on the royal family. Some of the groups have denied that. The reason it's kind of a big deal is because when Harry steps up to testify, as we expect to see tomorrow, he will be the first member of the British royal family to do so in more than a century. Danny Savalos is joining us now. So, Danny, talk about the significance of this moment for Harry from a legal perspective, right? You are not a royal watcher. You are not our royal expert. We don't need you to be. We need you to be our legal analyst here of what it means that somebody of Harry's stature is going to directly testify about the harm done to him.
I'm not even a barrister or a solicitor in the United Kingdom, but I can tell you that in the United States, typically, it may surprise folks that the plaintiff doesn't necessarily show up for the entire trial, but that's only about keeping your client in the room as a spectator. If your client is scheduled to testify, you had best get him into ye old courthouse, and I'm using old English there, to testify right away on time, because what happens when that doesn't happen is a cascade effect that all the other witnesses you had lined up on the plaintiff's side and on the defense have to get pushed back, and people are staying in hotels, they have flights, they may have traveled even from out of country to be there if they're an expert. So this is problematic, and I am not surprised at all that the justice was not pleased with a witness not showing up when the witness is the plaintiff and it's his own case. And it's for a birthday party. I mean, that's kind of diva behavior. It's maybe royal behavior. I don't know. So does that affect his case substantively? Well, probably not, as long as they have the goods. But of course, the defense in this case has been arguing that they do not indeed have the goods.
What would the goods be? In other words, would the emotional damage done to, let's say, Harry, if he talks about that, be a part of this? Because we heard that from his attorney today, that the press's, I'm quoting here, intrusion into his client's life tore apart Harry's relationship with his brother, Prince William, right? Does that meet the bar?
In the States, for example, that can be a component of damages, emotional harm. Often you need some kind of proof of emotional harm. You can't just go on the stand and say, I'm sad. You usually need a therapist's records, some other piece of evidence to show that trauma. But assuming for the moment that kind of harm is admissible and compensable in the UK, it's putting the cart before the horse. There may be terrible damages here. If you cannot prove the liability must come first. You don't get any damages, even if your damages are horrific, if you cannot first prove that a defendant was liable. And you prove liability by proving they did something wrong. And in this case, the defense has argued that there is no evidence that anyone hacked Harry's phone directly. The plaintiff on the other side is pointing to the massive number of investigators and the all-out effort, the infrastructure devoted just to reporting on Harry and the royals as a kind of overkill. So, of course, this kind of case is unprecedented. A royal hasn't testified in, I believe, something like a century.
Right.
So this is, in many ways, a case of first impression.
Really quickly, Danny, does this case at all set a bar or act as a test case for other lawsuits that are coming up? We know George Michael's estate, for example, is suing over hacking claims, et cetera.
Generally speaking, when it comes to defamation and these kinds of claims, these kinds of invasion of privacy claims are much more, it's a much more favorable jurisdiction in the UK than the United States. So if you have a favorable verdict here for the plaintiff or any subsequent plaintiffs, then it may just bolster the already commonly held view that the UK is a good jurisdiction for these kinds of cases.
Danny Savalos, thank you very much. Coming up, Apple is calling its first big product in nearly a decade revolutionary. Here's another word for it: expensive. We're going to take you to the launch of the new VR headset. Plus, a rather big surprise for a scuba diver in Oklahoma. We'll tell you what he found in a lake later on. So Apple today is rolling out its first VR headset, its first big new product since this thing, the Apple Watch, came out nearly a decade ago. The company says this is familiar yet revolutionary.
So in the same way that Mac introduced us to personal computing and iPhone introduced us to mobile computing, Apple Vision Pro will introduce us to spatial computing. This marks the beginning of a journey that will bring a new dimension to powerful personal technology.
Apple says that you can use the VR headset for things like watching shows or movies. You can look at pictures, get on the internet, play video games. You can do video conference calls with your colleagues. Wow, what a treat. And all for the low, low price of $3,500. That is more than triple the price of Meta's most expensive headset. That said, the market for VR headsets, it is flat/declining, right? Sales were down 2% last year compared to the year before in this country. I want to bring in CNBC's tech correspondent Steve Kovac from Cupertino, California. Tell us first, Steve, you're there. You watched this presentation, had a lot of bells and whistles. What does this headset do?
Yeah, it's very different, Hallie. So get used to this term. It's called mixed reality. That means it has cameras on the outside of this ski goggle-looking thing, and it projects what it sees on the outside of the world inside to displays there. And then it layers on, like you said, all those entertainment apps and other digital images on top of the real world. So, for example, you can kind of sit back on your couch and watch on a virtual TV screen, watch your favorite movie instead of on your actual television. That's one of many use cases they showed off today.
So I get it. They are certainly showing off plenty of use cases. But when you look and take a step back, as you well know, Steve, writ large in the tech world, so much of the talk has shifted to AI and, frankly, away from VR, a space that Mark Zuckerberg and Meta tried to own. So, like, with apologies to Mean Girls, when it comes to VR, is Apple trying to make fetch happen?
Yes, that's really funny. First of all, Apple is not into the metaverse thing, or at least that concept, the same way Mark Zuckerberg is. But you're actually exactly right, Hallie. 2 years ago would probably have been a more exciting time for them to do this, as we were all kind of geeking out on this technology and the promise of VR and AR. But you're right. Right now, it's all about AI, and that's what's really driving valuations for so many companies up. And Apple, while it does use a lot of artificial intelligence kind of on the back end of its products, including this new Vision Pro headset, it doesn't have the kind of ChatGPT-like service that we've been kind of enthralled with for so many months now. So are they behind on that? Maybe. Could Siri maybe get some more of those features? Absolutely. But today it was really all about that headset. And by the way, this is not a new thing from Apple, Hallie. They've been talking about this for 5 or 6 years now, about the promise of augmented reality. First they put it on your phone, and now it's on that headset.
Who is the market for this headset? We laid up the list of prices there, right? It ranges from several $100s. Meta's is like $1,000. Apple's is around $3,500. There are plenty of people who will pay a lot of money for something because it is Apple. And that's not a disparaging comment. I think that's just, we all know Apple heads or whatever. Like, who are they aiming at, and what's the critical reaction been so far to this?
Yeah, so far, a few people have already gotten to try it. Now, I was in a display area a little while ago. I only got to see what it looks like physically. I haven't gotten to wear it yet. I think I'm going to try it here in a couple hours. But the reactions have been good so far. I've been looking on Twitter from some of my peers in the tech reporting world who have gotten to try it at demos here at the campus in Cupertino, and they've been blown away by it. So apparently, it has much better and crisper displays than what the Meta headsets have, and it's just kind of an elevated version of these headsets that we've seen so far. But to your point, $3,500, you can buy. They also announced several MacBooks today. You can buy 3 of those MacBooks for the price of one of those Apple Vision Pro headsets. So it's not going to be for everyone at first. Eventually, though, yes, it'll get cheaper. Yes, it'll be more consumer friendly.
Right. Steve Kovacs. Steve, thank you. Enjoy the demo. Let us know how it goes. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Western Bureau, the Portland police say they have no reason to believe that the deaths of 6 women are connected. Their bodies were found within 100 miles of each other over the past few months, which raised some concerns among some that there could be a serial killer perhaps out there. Officials are still working to determine how some of these women died. Out of our Southern Bureau, lawmakers in Atlanta are set to vote today on a controversial plan to build a huge public safety training center that some critics call Cop City. Several City Hall offices were closed ahead of the meeting because of security concerns. Hundreds of people signed up to speak before the vote. The mayor says the training facility for police and firefighters and first responders will actually save the city money, but critics say it could be bad for the environment and that it could be used to, in their words, practice urban warfare. Also out of our Southern Bureau, an Oklahoma scuba diver has spotted maybe the last thing you might expect to see in a lake, a grenade of tear gas. The Love County Sheriff's Office says they got a call reporting a bomb or a smoke grenade. A bomb squad came up, found out, yes, it's in fact tear gas, live, by the way. It's like 2 decades old. Nobody knows how it ended up in the lake, but man, what a find. Still to come, a White House event that the First Lady, we are quite certain, probably didn't mind missing. We'll talk about who's celebrating with the Commander-in-Chief. There is nothing that this show is known for more than its excellent sportsmanship, right? I'm clearly just a good sport on a lot of fronts. So that is why we are showing you this. The defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs at the White House just tonight, getting to meet with President Biden to celebrate their 38-35 victory. Some of us remember over the Philadelphia Eagles back in February. Hardest sentence I've read in the news in months. President's getting his own Biden Chiefs jersey from the quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. Travis Kelce, look at that red suit, man. The Chiefs are celebrating 2 titles today. They didn't get to go to the White House when they won it all in 2020 because of COVID. And the president is acknowledging, yes, this is a tough day for some people in his family, specifically the First Lady.
I married a Philly girl. And it sounds a lot, doesn't it? Fortunately, she is overseas right now. Kelsey's family did get work. The Travis and Jason, the first 2 brothers, played against each other in the Super Bowl. And there's hope for the rest of us.
Monica Alba is live for us outside the White House. So, Monica, the president, audio is tough there. First Lady Jill Biden is overseas on a trip right now. She didn't have to witness this. Some folks may wonder, have I lost a bet? Why would we be showing this on our show, given that I'm ride or die with the Philadelphia Eagles? But you have 1 minute, so go for it.
And some may be wondering, why would you book me, a fanatic for the San Francisco 49ers, who also tragically lost to the Chiefs in a Super Bowl some years ago? So we can painfully get through this together, Hallie. I'm hoping. My thoughts are fully with you. I commiserate. This is a difficult story to cover, but somehow I think we can do it. Listen, it is an honor for any championship team to come to the White House, as you saw here on full display today. today. And as we witnessed there, this is something the president likes to have fun with. He can kind of do this in a tone that's certainly different than a lot else that he has to do with on the daily. But what is notable here is that this is something that's also a little bit of a return to some of the regularly scheduled programming, as one Biden advisor put to us, after most of the last month was consumed by that debt ceiling standoff. So this is a White House that is trying to showcase now all the other things the president is going to be doing now that he doesn't have to spend as much time related to that matter, given that the U.S. isn't going to default anymore. So you're going to see him continue to meet with world leaders this week. You're going to see the British Prime Minister here, Rishi Sunak, later in the week. And then the president's going to be traveling to North Carolina on Friday to continue talking about worker programs and that Investing in America tour. And so I think you're just going to start to see that. And suddenly some of these themes from 2024 as that reelection campaign, even though you won't see official events, he's going to be trying to kind of pivot back to that a little bit, even though the conversation's been a little different here in Washington lately. Hallie.
Sure has. And now we don't have to talk about it again for another entire football season. Monica Alba, thank you very much. Appreciate you. That does it for this hour. We've got more coverage picking up right now. So we are just learning tonight that special counsel Jack Smith has been meeting with lawyers for former President Trump here in D.C. in just the last few hours, with our team learning more about the timing of that federal grand jury looking at that classified documents investigation. So why does this matter? Because of this question. Does it put us closer to finding out whether federal charges will come down for Donald Trump? We'll explain how the former president's preemptively defending himself tonight. Also tonight, the stunning new details on that sonic boom right here in Washington, with the fighter pilots who scrambled, saw in the cockpit of the plane that ended up crashing. Plus, just into us, former Vice President Mike Pence jumping into a quickly growing Republican field for the White House, how he fits into the mix. Then one of the key markets on Wall Street hitting a 9-month high today, how it fits into the bigger picture of the economy right now. And potential justice tonight for an Australian mother out of prison after new evidence seems to back up her claim she didn't kill her children. So is she out of the woods yet? This wild case making global headlines a little later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and we are just finding out tonight that lawyers for former President Donald Trump are meeting with special counsel Jack Smith today, which may put us closer to answering a big question. Could Donald Trump face federal charges for mishandling those classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago? This is it, right? This is the three of his attorneys walking in, or I should say out of meetings today, that, according to a person familiar with the matter, included Jack Smith, the special counsel, and other top officials at the Justice Department. This comes after our team's exclusive reporting that a federal grand jury, which is hearing all the evidence in this case, will get together again sometime this week. From what we know, the special counsel is looking at a couple of key questions. First, did Donald Trump take hundreds of classified documents that he knew he shouldn't have taken back to Mar-a-Lago? And second, did he get in the government's way when they tried to get those documents back? Lay out the facts here, right? Here is what we know that we know. In June, federal agents went to Mr. Trump's Florida home to get a couple dozen documents back. This was like a year ago. The Trump legal team signed a letter saying basically, OK, that's all we have. That turned out not to be true because the FBI then found more than 100 classified documents during that surprise search of Mar-a-Lago in August. We also know from our reporting here at NBC, the grand jury heard a tape from 2021 that seems to show Mr. Trump acknowledging he took some classified documents. Keep in mind, this docs case is just one of the multiple legal issues that Donald Trump is facing. The political backdrop is obvious here. He's the current 2024 Republican frontrunner right now in the race for the White House. But this could be the first time ever that a former president has faced federal charges. We are hearing from Donald Trump on that possibility. And it is familiar, right? Calling it a witch hunt. He has said that before. He's asking how the DOJ can charge him when he says he did nothing wrong. Ken Delanian is joining us now. And Ken, you are the one who has confirmed for us here with our team that Jack Smith, according to your sourcing, was in this meeting himself with Donald Trump's attorneys. What is the significance of that? Explain what tea leaves we can read. Does it mean that we're getting potentially close to the end here?
It seems like it does, Hallie. And we don't know that this was the first meeting between Jack Smith and Donald Trump's lawyers. It almost certainly was not. Jack Smith's offices, by the way, are not here in the Justice Department. They are at another building at some distance away. What was significant about this meeting is it was at the DOJ with also with other political appointees. And it was sort of designed, our sense of it is it's an appeal. It's Trump's lawyers making a last-ditch effort to argue that their client should not be charged, and also to argue, as they have been arguing publicly, that they feel like Jack Smith's prosecutors have engaged in misconduct, have crossed the line, have used grand juries to intimidate people, have done some things that are outside of the norm of DOJ practices. Now, what was interesting is Attorney General Merrick Garland and Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, two political appointees that run the Justice Department, they made a conscious decision to avoid being in this meeting. They let the career people and Jack Smith handle it. And we don't know exactly what was said, but it sure does feel like, from a lot of other signals that we're seeing, that this investigation is reaching a conclusion and that Donald Trump and his lawyers are very concerned that Trump is going to be indicted.
Okay. The concern is there. If it were to happen, what is the timeline looking like here?
Well, as you said, we are reporting that the grand jury in this case that's been hearing evidence in Washington is scheduled to meet this week after having been dormant for about a month. And Donald Trump's own former lawyer said on Meet the Press, Tim Parlatore said on Meet the Press, that latency he viewed as a sign that the investigation was coming to a charging decision. So if, in fact, they're coming back and they're going to vote on an indictment, we don't know if that for a fact, but it's one of the possibilities this week. And if they vote to indict Donald Trump this week, then what's likely to happen is that indictment would be sealed. It would be returned and then placed in the clerk's office under seal. And then the Justice Department would make arrangements with Donald Trump to surrender, as you saw in the New York City situation. And he would come to court here. And the moment he appeared in federal court is when the indictment would be unsealed and we would see what the charges are, Hallie.
So this would be like, just for if we were thinking about what it would look like, we would see potentially Donald Trump flying up from Florida here to Washington.
I think he's in Bedminster, but yes, the same principle.
I'm sorry, right.
Just that kind of circus that we saw in New York, you know, with the kind of security precautions that would need to be taken. Now, there's a remote possibility that they could allow him to do this virtually because they did that during the pandemic. But most legal experts I talked to think that he would be required to actually come to the courthouse.
Ken Delanian, I know it is a lot of moving pieces for you this week. Thank you for being one of the tips of the spears for us in this reporting. Also new tonight, some brand new and frankly extraordinary details about that scramble of military fighter jets going supersonic to try to intercept a small plane as it drifted off course over the restricted airspace here in Washington and then crashed, killing 4 people in just the last 24 hours. Fighter jets creating sonic booms so loud they literally shook buildings. People could hear them all across D.C. as they tried to catch up with that plane, in part because of the possible security threat. That boom was everywhere. People could hear it online. We're learning now that the pilot of the plane was apparently incapacitated, slumped over in the cockpit, not responding to radio calls. This is a plane that basically flew right over the Capitol before it eventually went up and crashed in rural Virginia. Federal investigators are now on the scene looking into what went wrong. I want to bring in Tom Costello, who's joining us now. And Tom, we are now learning more about the victims of this plane crash, including, horrifically, a little girl, just 2 years old.
Well, the whole thing is tragic, absolutely. Let me just tell you the names of the victims, as family members in New York are now confirming that Adina Azarian was the mom. She was a real estate broker there in New York. She was on board with her 2-year-old. The 2-year-old's name was Aria. They also had their nanny on board and, of course, the pilot on board. We don't have those identities yet. You showed that crash scene in Virginia. Investigators with the NTSB tell me it is just absolutely mass destruction there. Nothing of any substance survived in terms of the structure of the plane, and nobody survived, of course, who was on board. And as you can see, there were still flames burning on the scene when investigators got there, that according to the NTSB. Let me show you the map here. This is important because everybody's wondering how the heck did this happen. The plane left Tennessee 1:13 in the afternoon, goes up to Long Island, New York, and then it does a U-turn and comes all the way back and crashes in Virginia. Now, the question is, why did the plane, by the way, the pilot was unresponsive almost the entire time. If the pilot was incapacitated, how did the plane do a U-turn? Here's what they think. They think that the pilot had pre-programmed the autopilot so that they would go to Long Island, and then the next waypoint, the next destination, was, in fact, back to Tennessee. And so as a result, when he got to the waypoint, or the plane got to the waypoint, even if the pilot was incapacitated, then the plane just auto-programmed to go back to Tennessee. And when they were flying back towards Tennessee, back to D.C., that's when the Air Force had to scramble, we now know, 6 F-16 fighter jets. Take a listen to John Kirby, the national security spokesperson.
They had to turn on the speed to get to him, which is why people here in the district area heard a sonic boom. They had to break the sound barrier to get up the speed to get to the aircraft in question.
We also know now that the pilot was out of radio communication starting just 15 minutes after he left Tennessee. So within 15 minutes, controllers are trying to call him, tell him to change his elevation. There you go. 113 takeoff, 128 not responding. Multiple attempts to raise him, no response. Then the fighter jets saw that he was slumped over and the plane ran out of fuel and crashed. Just an absolute tragedy. It does appear at this very early junction that the possibility that they lost air pressure inside the cabin is at this point a leading theory.
Tom Costello, just awful. Thank you so much for the new reporting for us tonight. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Tonight, the 2024 presidential race is getting a little bit bigger because former Vice President Mike Pence is filing some paperwork to make it officially official in just the last few hours that he will, in fact, make a run for the White House in 2024. That sets him up, of course, to challenge his former boss and the current leader of the pack on the Republican side, Donald Trump. His campaign says Mr. Pence is going to formally kick this whole thing off in Iowa Wednesday afternoon. He is not the only one who looks like he's getting in this week. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is set to announce tomorrow, according to a couple sources. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum looks like he'll announce in the next few days, too. Vaughn Hilliard is covering all of this for us. Vaughn, let's start on the Pence factor and then widen it out a little bit to what this crowded field looks like, right? Because it is not a shocker that Mike Pence is getting into this race. It's been speculated about for months, if not over a year at this point. But at some point, with Donald Trump leading the pack in the Republican race, too many competitors could end up diluting any opposition to him in the primary, right?
Right. And let's just start with the baseline. Let's just look at the poll numbers here, because they have held consistent ever since Donald Trump was the first to announce back in November here. And when you're talking about concern about diluting the vote, you're talking about Donald Trump with almost half of the Republican electorate here at this point. And that is where it was actually New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu today who announced he is not going to jump into the race, one of the few who was considering that it is not going to get in. And he said that it is going to be imperative on these candidates, if they are not polling well by Christmas time was his timeline, that'd be about a month before the Iowa caucus, it will be on them to get out of the race and essentially consolidate their support against a more viable alternative. Right now, that person appears to be Ron DeSantis. But Mike Pence, he was the former vice president of the United States. And this weekend, he was running, kept mentioning the administration. Of course, that was the Trump-Pence administration. This week, on Wednesday, when he goes back to Iowa to formally kick off his campaign, he's going to make the pitch that he is an extension of the, in his words, successes of the Trump-Pence administration, just without the complexities that are Donald Trump. And yet what you're looking at is a reality that we're 8 months from the Iowa caucus. And so the timeline is actually going to move pretty quick for all of these guys in this race. And you're talking about the first debate even sooner, just 2 months from now, Hallie.
Yeah, that's right. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much, friend. Just a few hours ago, the Biden administration has been warning that China is getting more and more aggressive after this video. I want you to look at it, right? This is a close encounter between a Chinese warship and a U.S. destroyer. This shot is from kind of far away, but you can see how close the Chinese ship gets to the U.S. ship. That's why there's so much concern about this specific incident that you're seeing right here. The U.S. wants China to make better decisions, basically, when it comes to what they're doing in the sea and in the air. Watch.
We're going to keep standing up for those rules of the road. We're going to keep standing up for that international law. And as I said earlier, we're going to keep flying. We're going to keep sailing. We're going to keep operating where international law allows us to.
China's defending what it did, with the foreign ministry saying in a statement at a briefing that what they did was legal. They were allowed to do it, that it's the U.S. that should be reflecting on their own mistakes. This is just the latest in a series of these close encounters. There is this one. You probably remember seeing it from a few days ago. The Defense Department releasing this, a Chinese fighter jet, they say, flying right in front of the nose of a U.S. plane over the South China Sea. Dan DeLuce is joining us now. So that was one. Now we have this ship incident. Granted, it's, a football field and a half away from each other. That's actually very close in the context of these ships. Talk us through how this plays into the broader tensions now between the U.S. and China, because that's not de-escalating.
This is really serious. It's no joke stuff. And it is reminiscent of what happened in 2001, way back when George W. Bush was president, and a Chinese fighter jet collided with an American surveillance plane. It was a huge incident, but back then, U.S. and Chinese relations were much better. So we're in a much different place now. And the Chinese seem to be sending a message to back off, that basically they don't like it when the U.S. flies its planes and sails its ships in what they consider their backyard. Now, of course, you heard John Kirby say these are international waters.
Right.
This is international airspace. So it's very tense, and it wouldn't take much to really ignite this.
So what is going to bring the temperature down?
I don't think anyone has the answer to that. The U.S. answer to that is dialogue.
Right, talk.
Let's have a hotline.
Right.
Let's do it the way we did in the Cold War. But the Chinese don't see it that way. And they have cut off the military-to-military dialogue between the generals.
Right.
And they really see it differently. The American view is you speak when you have an angry situation with your counterpart.
Right.
They view dialogue as a reward when things are going well. And from their point of view, the U.S. is aggressive, it's provocative, and they really feel they need to assert themselves in that part of the world. And there's a real danger here.
Who is the most likely person to help unlock some of this, right? Because you have the spy balloon incident, you have these close encounters now. Obviously, it was extraordinary to see it on the jet. It's extraordinary to see it with these ships. Who's the best emissary from the U.S. to be able to have these conversations?
Again, difficult question. It may be the president himself. He believes he still has this relationship with Xi dating back years. That's one option. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, is supposed to go back to China at some point. The trip was canceled after the balloon. Maybe he can deliver it. There's a new Chinese ambassador in Washington now. That also could be part of the solution. There's sometimes former CEOs, corporate types, can also deliver unofficial messages. The CIA director was just in Beijing. That's another possible channel. So, but this is very difficult. These issues are not easily solved.
Dan DeLuz, fascinating. Thank you for being all over it for us tonight. Appreciate it. In other overseas news, you've got Russia claiming today that Ukraine has launched this big counteroffensive, they say, to get back its land, with Ukraine at a key moment, a pivotal moment in this invasion, gearing up to make a big effort to break through Russian forces and to get its land back. Okay, Ukraine has basically been saying, no, this counteroffensive actually hasn't happened yet. They've been trying to keep it somewhat hush-hush as it related to the timing. But Russia says, no, we're seeing more aggression from Ukraine in their view already, that up to 300 Ukrainian troops, they say, were killed in these attacks over the weekend. A spokesperson for Ukraine says, no, they're not going to say whether any attacks have happened, when they'll do it. But the U.S. says it's doing its best to have Ukraine ready for what's ahead. Molly Hunter has more from Kyiv.
This has been a day of chasing. That Russian Ministry of Defense statement, which kicked this all off overnight, claims that Russia had repelled a, quote, large-scale offensive. They say offensive, not a counter-offensive, which is the language that Ukrainian officials and Western allies use when they talk about the stated goal of that counteroffensive on the Ukrainian side. It's to take back land that Russia is currently occupying inside Ukraine. But this Russian Ministry of Defense statement called it an offensive. They said it was happening in the southern part of the eastern Donetsk region. They said it was unsuccessful. And that same statement said hundreds of Ukrainian troops died. Now, NBC News has not verified that claim. We've also not independently verified the drone video that they released that Russia says shows Ukrainian troops trying to break through that Russian defensive line. Well, just in the last couple of hours, we've received two statements, one from the Eastern Group of Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, who told NBC News that this is an absolute lie, referring to that statement. They did not cause us any losses. They understand that we have combat work going on, which will soon be reflected in their position. And then the deputy defense minister put out a statement, and she said, what is happening now? We are continuing the defense that we started on February 24th, 2022. A defensive operation includes everything, including counter-offensive action. So they are saying, of course, they will be pushing that Russian defensive line. Of course, they will be looking for vulnerabilities in that defensive line, specifically around the Donbass region. Now, Ukrainian officials have long said they will not confirm or even announce a start of a counteroffensive. Over the weekend, though, President Zelensky, sitting down with the Wall Street Journal, really kicked that speculation into high gear. For those of us reading the tea leaves, he said, we are ready very clearly to launch a counteroffensive. The next day, though, the Ukrainian military released a 30-second video where basically Ukrainian soldiers are seen going shh like this in the campaign of silence. I think what we'll be telling, though, is how hard Russia hits Ukrainian cities if they continue their stepped-up aerial bombardments tonight. I'll send it back to you.
Our thanks to Molly Hunter for that reporting. To Wall Street now, where we're getting a look today at maybe some more confusing news for the stock market. It seems good because for a very brief moment, the S&P 500 hit on the highest it's been in 9 months. Stocks ended up going back down, red across the board, but it means that the S&P is getting closer and closer and closer to this kind of magic number that's a pretty big deal for investors. It's the possibility for a bull market. That's a good thing as opposed to a bear market. In plain English, most experts agree, that's when stocks go 20% above their recent lows. It means investors are feeling optimistic. They're pumping money into the markets. But what does this mean for all of this talk about a recession? Right? I want to bring in Caleb Silver, who is joining me now. So, Caleb, we know that the markets are not the economy. We hear that a lot. But this does seem to be optimistic on the part of investors who are looking at the same data set that the rest of us are. Should we also be feeling optimistic about where the economy is going?
Well, the economy may be very confusing right now, but investors in the stock market have decided all the way back in October that they would start buying stocks again, slowly but surely. The S&P 500 so far this year up 11%, the NASDAQ up 26%. So we are on the cusp of a bull market, another bull market for the S&P 500. And a lot of this is because a lot of that uncertainty is gone. There's not going to be a debt ceiling debacle. We know the Fed's probably going to pause or keep rates in this range for a while. And corporate earnings have been better than expected. Investors like that. They're always betting on the future. The future looks a lot brighter than what might be happening in the economy today.
Caleb Silver, thank you for the breakdown. Appreciate it, as always. Still ahead, a group of migrants flown to California with no warning, apparently. But we know about what happened and who's responsible. Plus, music icons throwing a golden birthday celebration for hip-hop. We'll tell you who's set to perform, where the genre was born. Coming up. A serious health warning brought on by Americans crossing the Mexican border for cosmetic surgeries. We'll get into the deadly infection that some people are dealing with. But first, inside a London court today, we're hearing a judge is not too happy with the fact Prince Harry didn't show up for day one of proceedings in this very highly anticipated case between him and a British paper. Harry is expected to take the stand tomorrow, but the judge in the case says the first witness should have been ready to go right from the jump in case they had time for testimony today. Prince Harry's lawyer says the Duke of Sussex couldn't make it because he'd just flown in from L.A. after celebrating his daughter's birthday. Harry's case here is against Mirror Group newspapers. They publish the Daily Mirror, among others. It's the first of multiple lawsuits Prince Harry has against some of the most well-known tabloids in the UK. And his claims against all of them are fairly similar, that members of the press broke the law by doing things like hacking into his phone to get scoops. Some of the groups have denied doing that. The reason this is kind of a big deal is because when Harry steps up to testify, he will become the first member of the British royal family to do so in more than a century. Danny Savalos joins us now. So, Danny, talk about the significance of this moment for Harry from a legal perspective, right? You are not a royal watcher. You are not our royal expert. We don't need you to be. We need you to be our legal analyst here of what it means that somebody of Harry's stature is going to directly testify about the harm done to him.
I'm not even a barrister or a solicitor in the United Kingdom, but I can tell you that in the United States, typically it may surprise folks that the plaintiff doesn't necessarily show up for the entire trial. But that's only about keeping your client in the room as a spectator. If your client is scheduled to testify, you had best get him into ye old courthouse, and I'm using old English there, to testify right away on time, because what happens when that doesn't happen is a cascade effect that all the other witnesses you had lined up on the plaintiff side and on the defense have to get pushed back, and people are staying in hotels, they have flights, they may have traveled even from out of country to be there if they're an expert. So this is problematic, and I am not surprised at all that the justice was not pleased with a witness not showing up when the witness is the plaintiff and it's his own case. And it's for a birthday party. I mean, that's kind of diva behavior. It's maybe royal behavior. I don't know. So does that affect his case substantively? Well, probably not, as long as they have the goods. But of course, the defense in this case has been arguing that they do not indeed have the goods.
What would the goods be? In other words, would the emotional damage done to, let's say, Harry, if he talks about that, be a part of this? Because we heard that from his attorney today, that the press's, I'm quoting here, intrusion into his client's life tore apart Harry's relationship with his brother, Prince William, right? Does that meet the bar?
In the States, for example, that can be a component of damages, emotional harm. Often you need some kind of proof of emotional harm. You can't just go on the stand and say, I'm sad. You usually need a therapist's records, some other piece of evidence to show that trauma. But assuming for the moment that kind of harm is admissible and compensable in the UK, it's putting the cart before the horse. There may be terrible damages here. If you cannot prove the liability must come first. You don't get any damages, even if your damages are horrific, if you cannot first prove that a defendant was liable. And you prove liability by proving they did something wrong. And in this case, the defense has argued that there is no evidence that anyone hacked Harry's phone directly. The plaintiff on the other side is pointing to the massive number of investigators and the all-out effort, the infrastructure devoted just to reporting on Harry and the royals as a kind of overkill. So, of course, this kind of case is unprecedented. A royal hasn't testified in, I believe, something like a century.
Right.
So this is, in many ways, a case of first impression.
Really quickly, Danny, does this case at all set a bar or act as a test case for other lawsuits that are coming up? We know George Michael's estate, for example, is suing over hacking claims, et cetera.
Generally speaking, when it comes to defamation and these kinds of claims, these kinds of invasion of privacy claims are much more, it's a much more favorable jurisdiction in the UK than the United States. So if you have a favorable verdict here for the plaintiff or any subsequent plaintiffs, then it may just bolster the already commonly held view that the UK is a good jurisdiction for these kinds of cases.
Danny Savalos, thank you very much. 3 Americans dead from a fungal meningitis outbreak that's being linked to cosmetic surgeries in Mexico. The CDC is now warning that hundreds of other people could be at risk. One of just multiple concerns that face people who are heading across the border to get cosmetic surgery. Why are they doing it? Well, because it's cheaper. This multi-state outbreak of this fungal meningitis has been traced to people who were treated at clinics in Matamoros. You see it right here. It's just over the border with Texas. So far, the CDC says more than 200 people in 25 states have been maybe exposed because they got an epidural at those clinics this year. Mexico is the second most popular destination for so-called medical tourism, according to Patients Beyond Borders. More than 1 million Americans travel there every year to try to take advantage of these cheaper treatments. It's everything from dental work to light cosmetic surgeries. But the CDC says anybody who had an epidural at either of those 2 clinics this year should be tested for meningitis ASAP, even if they don't have symptoms. Dr. Natalie Azar joins me now. This is a very specific type of meningitis. Explain what we're seeing here and the big concern.
Yeah, so meningitis is basically an umbrella term, Hallie, that refers to inflammation of the lining of the brain and the spinal cord. In the U.S. and really around the world, viral meningitis is the most common. It can accompany viruses that cause the common cold, which I know is a little bit nerve-wracking, but tends to be very mild, and people, will get better without any treatment. Fungal and bacterial meningitis, on the other hand, are truly medical emergencies and need to be treated immediately in the case of a fungus with antifungal medication, and in case of bacterial meningitis with, of course, antibacterials. As kids go off to college, they get the meningococcal vaccine. That might start to sound familiar. That's to prevent, meningitis caused by meningococcal B.
Medical tourism has been a thing that we've talked about on this show. It's been growing and growing and growing for years. And Matamoros is right across the border from Texas, from a town called Brownsville, right? Explain the dynamic there. Do you hear about that from your patients? What should people be looking for if they do want to go get, granted, cheaper care, right, in other countries?
So the number one thing, Hallie, is to understand that any facility that's providing this kind of care needs to have infection prevention and control procedures in place. But how is someone going to know that, right? Unless you're having somebody on the ground who's going to vet that for you. So a couple of tips that I would have for people would be the following. Make sure that the facility or the hospital you're going to has received some sort of certification or accreditation. All hospitals in this country and medical facilities are evaluated by what we call the Joint Commission. And that is a really rigorous process to make sure that standards, prevention prevention, infection prevention control and all of that kind of stuff is up to date. You want to look and see whether or not they have any, safety issues. Look at their safety record. Has there been any litigation against them? And finally, the people who are providing the care, are they licensed? Are they up to date on board certifications? I got to tell you, I know it sounds appealing, to have a facelift or have some sort of plastic surgery for maybe a third of the price that you would pay for here in this country, but there's a risk involved, right? I mean, again, like I said, I can make a recommendation for people to do all of these things, but at the end of the day, do you really know? We have these strict, measures in place in this country. That may not be the place or the same everywhere else. And it's kind of like up to the person getting the procedure to make sure that they have vetted where they're going to do it. It is a bit of a risk. And, this doesn't happen commonly. It's a rare occurrence, especially with these fungal infections with medical equipment. But when it does happen, it is incredibly serious, Hallie.
Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a woman who lived in that collapsed Iowa apartment building, you see it here, is now suing the owner, the contractors, the city of Davenport itself, saying in the lawsuit that these people knew the building was dangerous but kept tenants in the dark. The filing comes the same day that a third body was pulled from the rubble. Number 2. Federal prison officials say FBI agent turned traitor Robert Hansen died in prison today at 79 years old. He'd been serving 15 life sentence in a supermax prison for spying for the Russians. Hansen pleaded guilty to selling thousands of classified documents to Moscow in what the Justice Department once called possibly the worst intelligence disaster in American history. It's not clear whether his death is under investigation. Number 3, a state school board in Oklahoma has now voted to approve the first publicly paid for religious school in the country. That's after the state's attorney general told them that that's actually a violation of the Constitution in Oklahoma. He says there's probably going to be a legal fight now. This online charter school would teach kids across Oklahoma from K through 12. Number 4, the Postal Service says more than 5,300 workers were attacked by dogs in the last year. The agency says Houston, Texas was the city with the most attacks, with 57. The post office is trying to raise awareness about this. They're trying to make the job safer for postal workers. The theme for this year's campaign, even good dogs have bad days. Number 5, this August, the 50th anniversary of the birth of hip hop. So you know how they're going to, people have to celebrate, right? With a huge concert at Yankee Stadium, packed with performers, headlined by Run DMC, Lil Wayne, Snoop Dogg, Lil Kim. It is truly, if we started listing all the big stars, we would have no other news in the broadcast tonight. DJ Kool Herc's also going to perform 50 years to the day when he used not 1, but 2 record players to DJ at a party. So fans of hip-hop, big moment, big milestone for you. Coming up, Apple's big reveal and the even bigger price tag attached to it. That's just ahead. Apple tonight rolling out its first ever VR headset, its first big new product since the Apple Watch came out 10 years ago. The company says this thing is familiar yet revolutionary. Watch.
So in the same way that Mac introduced us to personal computing and iPhone introduced us to mobile computing, Apple Vision Pro will introduce us to spatial computing. This marks the beginning of a journey that will bring a new dimension to powerful personal technology.
Apple says you can use the VR headset for a lot of stuff, right? It's not just about video games. You can watch shows or movies. You can look at pictures. You can look at the internet. You could do, lucky you, video conferencing calls with your colleagues if you wanted to, or perhaps your friends. All for the price of $3,500. That is more than triple the price of Meta's most expensive headset. Thing is that VR markets, for these kinds of headsets, it's flat, even a little bit down. You can see it down 2% this past year compared to the year before. I want to bring in NBC's tech correspondent Jake Ward, who is in Cupertino, California, for us tonight. So, Jake, let me start with the actual headset, the sort of hardware itself. Have you demoed it yet? I don't know if you've tried it, but what does it do? What's the big selling point?
Well, Hallie, they were not allowing all but a tiny fraction of us to come anywhere near these things, really. I mean, and so it's all theoretical at the moment. But in theory, one will be able to experience what they're calling mixed reality. And that is not just like the Oculus, the Meta-made headset in which you have a closed environment, but an environment in which you're actually looking through these sorts of ski goggles and having various interfaces overlaid on top of it. According to Apple, you'll have this very lifelike experience in which the sort of screens you're looking at and the FaceTime interviews you're doing and the movies you're watching will appear before you. The screens they're on will cast shadows in the space you're in. You'll be able to take multi-dimensional videos of your kids and then watch them in 3 dimensions later. Supposedly, it's going to be this tremendously immersive experience. But of course, this is $3,500. I was imagining your face kind of going when the price got announced, because it's an extraordinary amount of money to ask someone to put this thing onto their face, Hallie.
I mean, that's the look, Jake. It's like, what? Because it is so much money, and it makes me wonder who the customer is here, right? Because I think, like, for a normal person like me, meaning like I'm not a tech nerd, Pokemon Go. I was like, when that was a big trend, I was doing mixed reality, right? Looking at the thing, looking at it, like, who are they going for with this price tag and with this technology right now?
Well, this is really the best possible question for this. I mean, I was actually, once they announced the price, $3,500, I quickly went to my phone and I thought to myself, okay, immersive experiences. What are other immersive experiences I could have on this planet? I looked at the longest flight one can take from JFK to Singapore. That's about $1,000 round trip. You want to do a 10-day safari in Kenya? That's about $1,500. You can come back with enough change to, have a nice weekend somewhere. So, that feeling of money to spare is really one of the fundamental qualifiers in terms of the audience. But then, what is it really about? It's not just all these things we're making fun of. It is about Apple trying to recreate the success of the past.
I'm not making fun of it. I'm really not,
1,000 ships. No. I am a little, okay, I have to admit to you. But what we're talking about, right, is strategically a company that has seen such success with the iPhone, such that all of us carry them around now.
That's
8 of the 10 top-selling smartphones in the world are iPhones. They want to recreate that kind of transformative technological experience. I think the effort here is to try to get that first step forward. This just was, I would say it isn't quite what I expected, I have to admit.
Okay, but so right now, I mean, as you well know, because we talk about it all the time on this show, the hot tech thing at the moment is AI, artificial intelligence. VR feels like something we were talking about maybe 18 months ago when Mark Zuckerberg was trying to make a play for that space, when people were sort of still in pandemic times, et cetera. Is this a twist on the VR experience? Does Apple think that VR, if not the metaverse, but at least that VR is going to have a resurgence?
Well, the distinction here that Apple would argue exists is between Meta's vision, which is a totally immersive experience in which you are in an artificial environment. And this instead is going to be this AR experience in which I walk around and I think, oh, what's her name? Oh, it's Hallie Jackson, right? It's going to tell me on the interface all the useful stuff I need to know in my life. It's going to give me workspaces I never had before. I get to look at a 100-foot, movie screen in a way I've never been able to before. But most importantly, Hallie, it opens up a profit opportunity for these companies. If they can really get in there and get us to live our lives inside this kind of environment, they get to analyze our behavior in a way that they've never done before. And that is the true value of technology, as we've talked about so many times.
That is such a good point. Can I just ask you about one last thing, which is what I will call, and again, I think it's a fascinating technology, but I think back to Google Glass, which was also supposed to be a not truly immersive experience. And this was years ago, but that you're going to wear something on your face. It's going to have little things coming up on screen. And part of the reason why it seems Google Glass didn't work out is because of the nerd factor. People looked and felt like they looked like dweebs. Are we going to be like, how is Apple, do they think that these ski goggle things are like so cool that people are going to walk around? Like, help me understand that. Did Tim Cook address that?
Hallie, I wish, yes, the cool factor, super important. How this solves it, I don't know. I can't really tell you. I know they say they're going to superimpose some special eyes on the outside so people will be able to tell where you're looking, and that will somehow be cool. But I don't know. I have to say, from a cool perspective, that kind of whisper aesthetic of Apple stuff doesn't seem to be present in this. But, there it is. Maybe it's just the first step of many.
I just have to ask, as somebody with an iPhone and an Apple Watch, I'm just curious. Jake Ward, thank you. We could obviously talk about this for 10 more minutes. I will let you go. Appreciate you. take you out west, further out west. Let's stay out west, right? Where tonight we're learning that a second plane full of migrants dropped off with no warning has arrived in Sacramento not long after 16 migrants from Texas were left in front of a church there. You're looking at some video here. This is according to the California Attorney General's office. We want to show that private plane right after landing. This is what it looked like. Right now, the California governor, the state's Justice Department, says they're investigating whether these migrants were sent perhaps by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. State AG says the first flight of migrants showed up at this church. You see it here with what he says are documents that seem to be from the Florida government. Ron DeSantis' office did not respond to our request for comment. If it was Governor DeSantis who sent these migrants to California, it would not be the first time his office has done something like this. Remember, they flew 50 mostly Venezuelan immigrants from Texas to Martha's Vineyard without any warning back in September. Squad Venegas is following all of this for us and is joining us now. Bring us up to speed on this. What do we know about these migrants in Sacramento? Who might have sent them? And now this discussion from the California governor of whether this could constitute, in some ways, kidnapping, considering these people didn't know where they were going, he says.
Hallie, the Attorney General's office has told NBC News that the migrants were carrying documents that indicate the state of Florida was involved in their transportation. Now, we know that both flights were from New Mexico to Sacramento. We know that that first flight of migrants from last week, those 16 migrants had crossed into the U.S. Through Texas, arrived in El Paso after they were processed by CBP, and someone practically or actually convinced them to get on this plane and go to Sacramento. Now, one of the arguments here is that these migrants are confused. They didn't completely understand where they were going, as we saw with those migrants last year in Martha's Vineyard. Many of them have court dates in cities as far as New York City. So you can imagine how confusing this might be with them moving forward. Now, they are receiving help by state agencies in California and other nonprofit organizations that are helping them moving forward. Now, the state attorney has begun their own investigation, and they've also said that while they will continue to collect evidence, they want to say very clearly, this is a statement saying state-sanctioned kidnapping is not a public policy choice. It is immoral and disgusting. Here's the Attorney General of California speaking about this.
It could violate criminal laws. It could violate civil laws. So we're continuing our investigation. We'll get to the bottom of that. We want accountability.
Now, Hallie, to be clear, the Florida state legislature has allocated money this year, $10 million, then $12 million additionally to state officials to use that to transport undocumented migrants to what they say are blue states with sanctuary laws. Hallie.
Squad Venegas, thank you very much. Coming up next here on the show, New Zealand's former leader getting one of the country's highest honors today. We'll have more after the break. We have some breaking news out of Virginia where we're just learning that the mother of that 6-year-old who shot his teacher, remember that? Well, the mom is now charged with federal gun crimes. Deja Taylor is her name. She was charged with 2 counts, including several counts we'll get into in a second. She was previously indicted on charges of felony child neglect and a misdemeanor count of recklessly leaving a loaded firearm to endanger a child. Now, remember, that was a different set of charges. That was when she was indicted by a Newport News grand jury. The teacher, remember, Abigail Werner, had been shot back in January at Rishneck Elementary School by a student in her 1st grade classroom. Now, the 6-year-old is not facing charges. Let me bring in Danny Savello. So, Danny, I want to make sure I got this right? She's been charged with being an unlawful user of a controlled substance in possession of a firearm and making a false statement during purchase of a firearm. These are federal gun charges. She's already been indicted. We know that her attorney has said she's apologized to the teacher, but there's not a lot of clarity into how her son actually got this gun in the first place.
And that's not really what the federal indictment is even about. Right. Nothing in this federal indictment, and as I understand it, to charge only those 2 counts, has anything to do with negligently entrusting a firearm to a child. It really is 2 crimes arising from really the same crime, which is you can't be a drug user and in possession of a firearm. And since the paperwork you have to fill out, the Form 4473, requires you to say whether or not you're a habitual drug user, obviously if you check yes, they're not going to give you the gun. So it's really 2 crimes arising from the same transaction, someone being an unlawful drug user. Now, the reality is there are certain people who are prohibited from using firearms. Among them are felons. But there's an obvious paper trail when you're a felon, which is a conviction on paper in court somewhere. It's a lot harder to discern what is and what is not a habitual drug user. So this smells to me, and I'm just projecting based on what I'm hearing so far, is that federal investigators probably went to her, found out she was a drug user. She likely talked to them, likely may have admitted it, or other people close to her may have admitted it about her. And then right there, they've almost got enough for their indictment. But it's a little more amorphous to charge someone for being a drug user in possession of a firearm, because what exactly is a drug user is a little more subjective. What is a felon is not subjective at all. Or yes, subjective.
But to be clear, right, there is a trial that is set to begin on August 15th. So just a couple of months from now, later on this summer. This is separate from the other indictment in Newport News, right?
Yes, although in federal court, it's usually you have 70 days in theory from the date of the first appearance. So federal court moves very quickly as well. But this federal case, it's going to be a plea. The state court case, hard to say, but this federal case will be a plea.
And her attorney said Monday that she would, in fact, plead guilty to the federal charges in an agreement with prosecutors. Danny Savellis, thank you for bringing us that breaking news, and I appreciate it. That does it for us for this hour and for the one before it. If you missed any of it, catch up on the latest reporting and newest interviews from our team. You can find us anytime in so many places, including Peacock, Hulu, YouTube. Just search Hallie Jackson Now. Top Story picks up our coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.